All right, welcome to our Thursday night New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for today, January 11th. We have Peter Gordon, who contributed to this wonderful book we've got many authors on. The team that time won't forget, the 1951 New York Giants. Tonight, Peter's going to be talking about one of Frank's favorite, or somebody that Frank brings up a lot, Clint Hartung. So we will get to Peter in a second after some house cleaning. Next week we have Alex Pavlovich. So you guys can rant and rave to him about what the Giants are doing, or should I say not doing. He'll be on next Thursday.
No good.
A couple other things. I sent out an email regarding I'm going to be presenting at the Hall of Fame on February 3rd. If anybody's up there, you are more than welcome and are allowed into the building for free, just as long as you say you're coming to the Sabre meeting. Two things monetarily. Our website that we have the payment of $155. I paid that today. It went up from 120. I argued with them. They didn't want to hear it, whatever. So that's one thing. I will send out the receipt so you know what the money that has been donated over the last few years, what still have some left, that's going to go to that. And also Sabre dues, which was 65, which contributes to us getting a lot of guests. If anybody needs any information on that, I will be more than happy to share it with you. But without Sabre's really helped us get quite a number of guests in the last few years. So I appreciate that, and I'm sure you guys do as well. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Peter Gordon to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Give it up to Peter. Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Gary, for inviting me, and thank all of you guys. I was at the online meeting last week, as most of you know if you were there, and I was just so thrilled and impressed with your passion, and particularly the passion to hear about one of my biography subjects for the Sabre Bio Project, Clint Hartung. So I actually have a presentation with pictures.
Okay.
So if I share my screen, right now the screen sharing is disabled, Gary, so you need to enable it for me.
Absolutely. Peter, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to share the screen here. And you can see here's I'm going to make it bigger. We're going to do the slideshow from the beginning. And there you can all see Clint there, the Hondo Hurricane, right? So first, before I really talk about Clint, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm doing these things. Just like our guest last week, I am a child of a mixed marriage. My dad was a Giant fan, living in Brooklyn, growing up. My mom was a Dodger fan, and I grew up a National League fan. So I was born after the Dodgers and Giants left New York, but when the Mets came in, from the time I was old enough to know about baseball, I was a Mets fan. You see on this page are some legacies I have from my parents. That is a 1954 World Series program. It was from Game 1 of the World Series that year that my dad went to, and now I have it. Both he and my mom passed away a few years ago, and it's fascinating to have. On the right is a baseball autographed by one of the Dodger teams where Bert Schotten was the manager. You can see Bert's signature there, and I've been unable to determine. I do not believe it's 1947. I think it's probably 49, but I've been unable to determine what year. But anyway, that legacy goes back, and of course, I still have my 1969 Mets yearbook. And as a writer, I started as a Sabre member in the 1980s. I had some articles I wrote that were in Sabre publications back then. But over the last few years, I've contributed biographical articles to over 20 Sabre publications, the 1951 Giants book, but also many, many others, the one about the 59 White Sox. I've got an article coming up in a book about pitchers who only had one win. I interviewed the great Ray pitcher, C.J. Reifenhauser. And if none of you know who he is, that's okay. He only won one game. I also did bios that are on the bio site of Art Fletcher and Josh DeVore. If you're thinking about older Giants, I've for a long time a member of the 19th Century Committee and the Dead Ball Committee. So that's more my era than modern times. But I'm also a poet. You can see right there, I have a small book. It's a chapbook. It's about 30 pages of poems I wrote about baseball. And also 2 of my poems, not in that book, were in the latest Turnstiles, the Sabre Arts Journal. And if you didn't know Sabre has an arts journal, I am thrilled to tell you. If you want the book, you can find it on Amazon.com. So I'm assuming with this crowd, you know why Clint Hurtle's important. You know he was Shohei Ohtani of the 1940s, that he was one of the greatest phenoms of his time. He was supposed to be a great pitcher and a great hitter. And as also you know, it didn't work out all that well. But let's go back to his early life. This on the left is a picture from the Hondo Anvil Herald in Hondo, Texas. Clint was born in Hondo, Texas. It is a small town. It had well, as you see, 40 miles west of San Antonio. It had a couple of thousand people when he was born. It still has less than 10,000 people. But it had a good baseball team in the 1930s. This is a picture, and I hope you can see it clearly enough, of the state championship team from 1939. 1939, of course, being a signature year in baseball. That's the year Lou Gehrig stopped playing because of his disease. It's also the year Gone with the Wind was the #1 movie, if you want to know what was going on in 1939. And Hondo was so proud of their state baseball championship team. And the guy on the far right in the last row, who's a lot bigger than everybody else, that's Clint Hartung. He was at the time a giant of a man, 6'4", 200 pounds, even in high school. He pitched, he played outfield, he hit home runs. He was not the #1 pitcher of his high school team, but he was the #2 pitcher. He pitched in the championship series and won his game. And everybody talked about him. If there was one member of that team that was going to make their mark in baseball history, it was going to be Clint. He was from what everybody said, nice young man, nice guy, didn't talk a lot. The taciturn Texan, you might say, if you like alliteration. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering where I got that, I actually contacted the Hondo, Texas Library to see if they had any old newspapers that talked about this baseball championship. And for those of you who are out there doing research on old baseball players or really new baseball players, that is my go-to move. If I am looking for information on a ball player and it's hard to find out about their early life, I go to their town library. So many things are digitized now. They didn't send me the papers. They digitized them and sent me the pictures of them, and they didn't even charge me. So that is the high school team. Now, he was not a senior that year. He was a sophomore. So he didn't graduate high school until 1941. I wanted to show you this picture. If you see that little dot on the left, that's where Hondo is located. This is off of Google Maps. And there are no other towns, but this 40 miles west, I wouldn't call it the middle of nowhere, but it's pretty far from places. What Hondo was most famous for in the 1940s was not the state championship or Clint Hartung, it's that sign, which if you can see it, it says, "This is God's country, don't drive through it like hell." Hondo, Texas. This sign was all over. People picked it up. It was in newspapers. It was in magazines. And that's what you saw when you first came into Hondo from the East. And I hope people didn't drive badly. I don't know who the woman is, but there you go. That's Clint in a close-up in his Hondo high school uniform. Smiling, as that's probably the biggest smile you'll ever see out of the guy. So in 1941, the New York Giants, who, as I'm sure you all know, were a tremendously successful team in the 1930s, won a bunch of pennants, only didn't win. I think they won the 33 series, but they didn't win the ones in the late 30s, but still a very good organization. Signed him for a $500 bonus, which I calculated is worth about $10,500. So I want to explain to everybody here that while he was certainly an interesting prospect between his pitching and his hitting, he wasn't necessarily the most sought after prospect. The baseball wasn't sure what to do with him. That was going to be a challenge throughout his whole career. Was he a pitcher? Would he be a better pitcher if he focused on it? Why didn't you just convert him to a home run hitting outfielder like Babe Ruth was, like so many other players were? I'm not sure. Maybe there was some uncertainty about his bat. So when they signed him, they weren't sure what to do with him. And they sent him in 1942. He played in Class C. Remember back then, there were a lot more minor league teams. And Class C was about what we'd call, I think, High A today. Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And he did great. 358 batting average and 3 wins in a short season. During that season, they promoted him to the Minneapolis Millers, which was the Giants' top farm team. Later, Willie Mays would play for the Minneapolis Millers. And he did pretty well in a short amount of time. But then, like so many other ball players, he was drafted. 1943, he goes into the Army Air Corps. The Air Force wasn't a separate unit then. And you have to wonder, I always wondered, what did that do to his development? Hey, listen, we were fighting a big war. We needed everybody to fight. And a lot of ball players fought. But it's one thing, even though the Army teams had a lot of professional players and they were much better than you would think of an Army team or today, they just weren't that great. He wasn't developing. Plus, he was working. He was a pilot. He had to be available for that. So while he did play ball in the Army to keep his skills up, he also was off fighting the war. And he was in the Army for 3 years till 1946. I'm going to get to his stats in a minute, but Clint Hartung was by that point very, very popular. Life magazine had written an article about him, the one-man ball club. And there was a bidding war for him. The Giants no longer had his rights. So in order to keep him, get him back, they paid him a $35,000 bonus. Big money back then, worth about $575,000 today. Again, today, the top draft picks, they'll get more than that. But you also have to remember the structure, right? Today, there's free agency. There's a lot more competition for players. Back then, teams, there was a reserve clause and baseball players came a lot cheaper. One of the articles that I read said, I wonder if Clint Hartung's agent was Scott Boras if he was alive in 1946, what would Clint have made? See that nice picture of him in his Army uniform holding a baseball? That's from that Life magazine article. What happened was, it was taking so long to resolve this. And for whatever reason, Clint never spoke about this to a reporter that I could find. He re-enlisted in 1946. He did not, he might have been able to get out of the Army in 46. The war had been over since 1945, but he re-enlisted. And he stayed at Hickam Field in Oahu, out in Hawaii. That was the Army Airfield in Hawaii. And he played for the Hickam team. And he went 25-0 as a pitcher. He was undefeated. Batted .567. It was like, well, I was going to say it was like me playing for a little league team, but frankly, I think those 12-year-olds could get me out easier than some of those guys could get out Clint Hartung. It'd be really tough. And I was playing with the 15-year-olds. They would clean my clock. That was a pretty amazing statistic. And as you see, that's the article. And there he is signing an autograph for a couple of young boys chewing gum. Yeah, we all looked like that back then. And there was so much hype about this guy. You think there's hype about Shohei Ohtani today? You think there's hype about the biggest prospects coming out of the minors today? Back then, in 1947, going into spring training, there was more hype about Clint Hartung than anybody else. He was going to be he was going to be Babe Ruth, Christy Mathewson, and Ted Williams all rolled up into one. The Giants had a terrible year in 1946 under Mel Ott. I think that they finished 7th, I believe. Mel Ott was a wonderful ball player, maybe one of the greatest of all time. Well, he was one of the greatest of all time, but he never was much of a manager. The team never really did all that much under him. And they needed something like this. Bill Gallo. I have the quote here on this slide from Bill Gallo. Those of you who live in New York might remember Bill Gallo wrote for the Daily News for years. He was mostly a cartoonist, but I have a quote from him saying this. He was going to be all those great players. He said there was more hype around Hartung than there was about any player he'd ever seen in this history covering baseball in New York. There were stories. Walker Cooper was the Giants catcher that year. And there was a story where they asked what it was like to catch him. And he held up his hand and showed it was all red and swollen. And he said, he's the only guy that I have to catch where I put a sponge in my glove. And he was pounding the ball in spring training, hit a home run in his first game in spring training. He was playing the outfield well. And it gave the fans something to look forward to. Something for the reporters to write about, which was great. There was one of the guys on the Giants who was doing publicity said after all this hype that he's making a big mistake actually showing up to play in the season. He should just go straight to Cooperstown. And as it turned out, maybe he did make a mistake playing in the season. Oh, I'm sorry. I gotta also remind you folks. He is going from playing in the Army base where he totally dominated the competition straight to the major leagues. No minor league seasoning in 1946. He could maybe, if he had gotten out of the Army, went to the minors for a year to get acclimated. It's a very difficult thing to leap directly from, even though he had some minor league training before the war, it's a very difficult thing to leap directly to the minor leagues from anywhere, from college. Some players have been successful doing it, but very few have. And that also may have been a problem for him. So in 47, Mel Ott's still the manager. The team with Clint Hartung finished in 4th place. The team with Clint Hartung set the all-time home run record. 221 home runs. Again, I assume you are familiar with this, that Giants team set the all-time record, a record that wasn't broken for many years. Of course, with the home run happy baseball we have now, it's been broken several times, and the record's now 307. But Clint Hartung was part of that. He hit some home runs. to help them. But it was an old, slow team that really couldn't do anything but hit home runs. How'd he do that year? Well, Mel Ott liked so much what he did in spring training. Clint started in left field, batted third, and went 2 for 3 with a double. Giants lost, but they won a couple of games later, and he also went 2 for 3. As a pitcher, he was 9-7 with a 4.57 ERA, and he hit 309, 4 home runs in 34 games, an 872 OPS. Pretty good performance. Why was it only 34 games? Well, Mel didn't like how his outfield defense. The explanation was that he really was having trouble tracking down fly balls in the Polo Grounds. And he was a little slow. He wasn't a fast guy. So they decided they would mostly keep him as a pitcher. Frankly, he's the kind of pitcher that John McGraw would have loved to have on his team. Because McGraw always loved to have a pitcher who could pinch hit. If you remember the 1920s, he signed Jack Bentley from the Baltimore Orioles, and Bentley his first year was something like 13-3 with a 400 batting average as a pinch hitter on the 23 Giants. And Clint Hartung would have been great for him. This is not a bad rookie season, though. This is a good rookie season. His ERA was high. His ERA was above the National League ERA average, but it wasn't the highest one on the team. So pretty decent. I'm going to apologize for showing this picture to the Giants group, but I just want to contrast the success of Clint's year with the player who was actually the rookie of the year that year, was a guy named Jackie Robinson, who led the Dodgers to the pennant and won the rookie of the year. So while Clint did fine, I mean, coming right out of the Army, straight to the majors, pitched and hit 300, that was a good start. But there were a lot better rookies out there. 1948, he comes back to the team. Again, he's mostly a pitcher, pitched 150 innings, 8-8 with a 4.75 ERA. Again, not pretty much above average. Had some good games, he had some bad games. The word on him was while he had a great fastball, it had no movement. So it was a fast pitch, but it came in straight. And Clint never developed a really good second pitch, a curveball, a slider, a knuckleball, anything else. He just threw it in. And of course, when I'm saying things about his game, we all need to remember that he was playing in the major leagues. I'm sure he pitched a lot faster than I could, and I'm sure I couldn't hit it. But major league hitters didn't seem to have much trouble with him. And then he didn't hit either. 179, 270, and again, this isn't the slash. 502 is his OPS, and didn't hit a home run. Now again, there was a lot of pressure on this guy. He was expected to dominate. He probably found it very frustrating not dominating. I don't know what kind of support he was getting from the from the Giants. And then Leo DeRocher came in as manager. Leo, as you know, was a difficult person. Leo liked his guys. He was saddled with Clint Hartung. Now, during the season, after Leo became the manager, he had Clint room with Frank Schellenbach, who was the Giants pitching coach, so that Clint could soak up Schellenbach's wisdom. Schellenbach had been a successful pitcher in the major leagues in the 30s. He pitched for the Cubs, among other teams. And the hope was he could turn Clint around. But it must have been just very frustrating. And the other thing about Leo was that he didn't like Leo's bench never played. He had his 8 or 9 or 10 guys that played a lot, and if you platooned, that was good. But if you were not one of Leo's top guys, you basically didn't get in the game, so you never got a chance. And the reason I'm saying this is I think one of the reasons Clint didn't pan out was that he didn't go to the minors, and then he never was allowed to play enough to acclimate himself to the majors. 49 or 50. I hope you like that Bowman baseball card. I wish I owned it. It's a picture I got. 1949, Leo decides we're going to keep pitching him. And that's just a bad year. 9-11, 5-run ERA. You're not going to go anywhere with that. So after 49, even though he didn't have a good year batting, Leo basically says, we're going to make you mostly a spot starter and we'll put you in the outfield. So 1950 had a good year with the bat, 921 OPS because he had 3 home runs in 32 games. He wasn't pitching much, but he wasn't playing much either. So he was the last guy on the bench, basically. 1951, he didn't pitch. He played in 21 games, 45 at-bats. Maybe some of you heard about what happened in the 1951 pennant race. Some of you familiar with that? Yeah, I guess you are. A little bit, right? So that picture, I'm sure you've seen it. And if you haven't seen it, I'm glad to show it to you. This is, of course, Giants celebrating at home after Bobby Thompson scores the winning run. Clint is in that group because he scored the first run. You see Ralph Branca walking back, number 13. And another thing, I have to say this, you know, Jackie Robinson staring at it, can't believe he lost. He said he wasn't going to go to the clubhouse till he made sure Thompson stepped on every base. And what happened? Of course, in the 9th inning, Don Newcomb has to be replaced. Giants get a couple of guys on. Don Mueller gets a single. Whitey Lockman hits a double. Sliding into third base, Don Mueller breaks his ankle. He's got to come out. They only guy left to put in is Hartung. So Hartung goes out and pinch runs at third base. And of course, Charlie Dressen decides to bring in Ralph Branca from the bullpen, even though Thompson's already hit 1 home run off of Branca in the series. And pitches to Thompson, and Thompson, of course, hits a home run that Branca always swore would only have been a home run in the Polo Grounds, would have been easy out in Ebbets Field. We'll never know. But that's what Clint Hartung does. So because Don Mueller's injured, Hartung actually gets to play in the World Series. He pinch hit, didn't get a hit. He played the 5th game, didn't get a hit. And of course, the Giants lose in 5 games to the Yankees.
6.
6, sorry. You are the right group for me to be talking to.
The game ended on Yom Kippur. The series ended on Yom Kippur.
Oh, that's right. But in any case, that's right. It was 6 games. Forgive me for that. I'm just focused on the one guy. He didn't help the team, but who knows? That I always thought the team had a much better chance, but maybe we don't have to talk about the 51 World Series. My guy didn't do much in it. This is from the 1954 program that my dad gave me. And what they were doing was, it's actually a nice, cool thing they do in the program. They go through all of the Giant pennant-winning teams in history. There's a little piece about all of them. I was really thrilled about it too, because of course I did Art Fletcher's bio, and he was a key in the teams that won in the early part of the century. And Josh DeVore played on the 1912 team that lost in an even worse way than the 51 team. But it was good to see this. And there's Leo DeRocher hugging Bobby Thompson, and that's the box score of the last game. So what happens in 1952? Clint's now 29 years old. He's getting a little old, but he's played 5 seasons in Major League Baseball. 48, 49, 50, 51. Yeah, 5 seasons. And you might remember that there was another rookie that the Giants brought up in 1951 by the name of Willie Mays that made a big contribution to the pennant race. But also in 1952, there was a chance, and it turned out to be the case, that Willie Mays got drafted. So they said, you know what? If Mays is going to be drafted, we need to bring Hartung back. You know, why would you bring back a guy that played as little as he did? Well, let's try it. He played 28 games because Willie Mays did get drafted, but he was only hitting 218. He still showed a little power, but then they sent him down to Minneapolis where he could play. And maybe you see now why Clint probably should have started in the minors. Even at 29 years old, he had a great year for the Minneapolis Millers, didn't play a full season, but still hit 334, 27 home runs, 93 RBIs. Did you think that would earn him time with another major league club or the Giants? Afraid not. 1953, he stayed with the Millers, and now he's 30, and now he's not hitting so well. Not a prospect. But he tried to stay in professional baseball. He played for the Havana Sugar Kings, which was a AAA team in Cuba. Didn't have a great season. Giants finally gave up on him, traded him to the Reds, who sent him to the minors. He never played for the Reds. The Reds actually traded him from their minor league team to Oakland in the Pacific Coast League, but he never played for Oakland. He never got into a game. And after 1955, he said, to hell with this. I'm going back to Texas. Also, the Plymouth Oil Company in Sinton, Texas, which is the little dot on the coast in that map of Texas that I have there, wanted Clint because they had a semi-pro baseball team. They used college players, minor leaguers, old major leaguers. They paid him money. They gave him a job at the oil company, and they played baseball. And the 1956 team won the American Semi-Pro Championship, baseball championship, largely because of Clint, who pitched and hit a ton of home runs. His coach, who was a coach of one of the local colleges, said Clint was a joy, hardly ever opened his mouth, but was really happy to be playing and contributing. Sinton is another small Texas town, almost the same climate as Hondo, maybe a little more humid in the summer. Again, less than 10,000 people. And that's where Clint Hartung lived for the rest of his life. He was married 3 times. He was divorced twice. But amongst all those marriages, he kept working for the Plymouth Oil Company and other oil companies. He had children. He had grandchildren. He had great-grandchildren. And he never talked much about his time in baseball. He died in July 7th, 2010, at 87. He lived to see his children, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren born and grown up. Lifetime, he had a 29-29 record with a 5.02 ERA. There have been pitchers with worse records, but that's not a great record. His lifetime batting average was .238 with an OPS under 7, 14 lifetime home runs, 43 RBIs. Would he have done better if managers had known what to do with him? If he had concentrated on pitching? Or if he had concentrated on batting? I don't know. It's a really hard thing to do both. We were talking about the Rays earlier. The Rays a few years ago went through a time when they were actually signing two-way players, right around the time that Shohei Ohtani was becoming known in Japan and being courted by professional baseball. They signed a guy named Jake Cronenworth, who they signed as both a pitcher and as a infielder. They traded Jake to San Diego, and Jake mostly has played for San Diego as an infielder. But occasionally, when a game, they were running out of pitchers, they would sometimes throw Jake on the mound. They had some other prospects that were going to be two-way players, but after a while, it was really clear that's hard to do. Shohei Ohtani is a phenomenon. He is and what happened to him this year, right? He's had to have Tommy John surgery. It's very, very difficult to do this. Even Babe Ruth eventually had to focus on one thing, and of course that was batting. Rick Ankiel, you might remember him. He was going to be a pitcher, but he was a good hitting pitcher. Everybody thought he could do both. He was going to be a great pitcher, but after a while, he ended up concentrating on batting. Clint Hartung is only the second major league player, at the first one after Babe Ruth, to hit his first home run as a pitcher and his last home run as a position player. There have been about, I think, 11 people who've done it since. But he was the first. Sorry, the first since Babe Ruth. He never talked much. The Hondo Hurricane, the taciturn Texan, whatever you want to call him, he never talked much about himself. In the 1980s, a reporter from Texas Monthly, a magazine, tracked him down in Sinton and asked him about his career and what he was doing. And Clint didn't say much. He mostly ended up talking to his wife about Clint. Clint doesn't say much. He had this picture of Clint now. He's still 6'4". He weighs 245, 30 pounds over his playing weight, sitting in his easy chair, happy to answer the questions, smoking cigarettes. But he never said much about what he did. He just said he was very grateful for his time with the Giants. He was grateful to play Major League Baseball. Baseball. Did things no other person has done. Very happy with his life where he is. And why? This is my favorite quote of what he said. If you wake up in the morning and it's raining, it's raining. It's sunny, then it's sunny. Because the guy had asked him, so what do you think about all that hype and not living up to it and your career and everything? He said, I stopped worrying about things a long time ago. Certainly came off to me like someone who, after his career was over, maybe he was happy it was over, not having to deal with the New York press. But he was happy where he was, and that was what was important. What else is his oops, sorry, that was my last slide. One other thing I wanted to mention, going back to this, Bill James, if you're familiar with Bill James' work, in his historical baseball abstract, he has several things that he does. When he talks about a decade in baseball, like he's had what he put the Paul Krischel Scouting Award that he gave to the scout who saw Carl Hubble pitch in the minors and said, nah, from Detroit, he said, Carl isn't going to be good to pitch for us. We need to get rid of him. And of course, then they traded him to the Giants. And the guy who said, who went to visit to see Willie Mays from the Boston Red Sox and said, oh, Mays isn't our kind of player, we shouldn't sign him. Every decade, he talks about an overhyped phenom from the minors who never amounted to what was expected of him. And he gave that name the Clint Hartung Award. Of course, in the 40s, it was Clint Hartung. Clint Hurdle was one of the ones who won it, if you remember him. He was way hyped by the Royals. He had an okay career, good manager, but never amounted to what people thought. And that's Clint's legacy. Gary mentioned that somebody was interested in the sideline reporter of Kaylee Hartung, who's a sideline reporter for the NFL, was related to Clint. I was unable to find that out. I actually sent an email, tried to contact the network. Apparently, this isn't their top priority answering that question. So I was unable to determine that. But other than that, that's Clint. That was about a half hour. So if there's questions, if there's things you want to know, I am happy to answer them. I'll stop sharing right now. And
Peter, that was fabulous. Really terrific. From my aspect, whenever I heard the name, I knew two things. He was this big bonus baby, and he came in to pinch run. I mean, the pictures and the information was just fabulous. And I know you and I spoke about Fred Merkel, that you did something on him. So come World Series time, I want you to come back and discuss that with our group. I think that'd be fabulous.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do it. One of my most cited articles, which is not a lot, is an article I did about the 1906 World Series, which is the only Cubs White Sox series, and that's how I first got into that whole pennant race. Because there were only three good teams in the National League in the aughts. It was the Giants, the Cubs, and the Pirates, and so I followed that and followed Fred Merkle, and he came up in a lot of writing I did about the dead ball era. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to do something about Fred Merkle.
One, couple of questions here. This book that's still available.
Yeah, the Giants book
Yeah,
or the
it's on
yeah,
Amazon or you can get it from Saber.
right.
You approached and you chose Hartung, or did they tell you we want you to do it on it?
The way it usually works is the word will go out to Saber members or the bio committee, and they're saying we're doing a book on X, and these are who's available. And usually by the time I get it, the Willie Mazes of the team are gone, and the famous people. But when I saw but I did, of the remaining folks that were left, choose Clint Hartung. I had to. I really wanted to learn more about him.
That's great. And I know Steve Rawchild always discusses the guys who are not the famous people, and that's why you coming on tonight speaking about Hartung is fabulous.
Yeah, I mean,
Great job.
remember, he was famous at the time. He just didn't live up to the hype. Oh, and you mentioned the bonus baby thing. He was one of the reasons he got his bonus before they passed the bonus baby rule, but he was one of the main reasons they did that. Because after that, they said, actually, the bonus baby rules, if you paid more than a $5,000 bonus, you had to keep the guy on the team for at least a year. The Giants were not required. We're not required to keep Hartung on the team. Hartung wanted to be on the team. He said that he made that a condition of signing the bonus, that he's going straight to the majors.
I believe also the bonus baby rule.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
The bonus baby rule in the 50s, the bonus baby could play in the minors for 1 year only.
Peter, I had one other thing. Oh, last thing. You mentioned he didn't like to talk about himself. Do you feel he didn't like to talk about himself because he was not happy with how his career turned out?
I think he probably was disappointed. Of course, who wouldn't be, right? He expected to do great and he didn't. And I'm sure he wasn't well liked in the locker room. He didn't have a lot of buddies in the locker room. On the other hand, he was really big and nobody wanted to mess with him. But I believe, based on the article, but about other things known the way he was very happy with his life at the end and proud of what he did. And frankly, he should be. When I interviewed CJ Reifenhauser, who I recently interviewed, the guy who won one game for the Rays, actually in that game, he got the win and Chris Sale got the loss. He's a gym teacher now in a high school, and he coaches the baseball team at a small town. And he is so proud of his professional baseball career. I mean, he didn't say, I'm so proud of my professional baseball career, but the way he talked about it, it came through. He said, yeah, I'd like to tell people I beat Chris Sale. And at least I got to do something that so few people have done. His dream was to pitch in the majors, and he pitched in the majors. And I think Clint Hartung did the same thing. He realized it, especially because, I don't know how the divorces went. I wasn't able to find a lot of information about what was the cause of the divorces. But the thing is, he had kids, he had grandchildren, he lived in a town that he liked to live in a small Texas town like the one he grew up in. I think he was pretty happy at the end.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. Mars, you are up. Mars, unmute.
There we go. Oh, well, thank you for joining us. Anybody that makes the major leagues, even if it's for the proverbial cup of coffee, is noteworthy, not only especially to the person. Well, Melot had these slow-footed players with the short foul lines, hit all these home runs. Leo DeRoche changed that. And a winning formula in even modern day baseball is pitching and defense. So you have teams like the Atlanta Braves and the Dodgers and the Yankees. With the Yankees, with all those bases empty home runs and questionable defense, sure they had Mariano Rivera, but they fell short in a lot of different categories. So Melot had players that couldn't feel the position, slow-footed, but could hit the ball for home runs. DeRoche changed all that. Anybody with a 179 batting average and a 4.75 ERA, that's Bush leagues. Today, that's allowed. That's how baseball has changed. Today, it's almost considered a 4.75 ERA average. That's how baseball is watered down. Well, the question I have is, what about the scouting? When they were scouting Hartung, did they ever have him face really good major league pitchers to see how he would do, even if it was spring training?
Well, he was in spring training and he did very well in that first spring training. But the answer to that is until that spring training, no. The only major leaguers he faced were the ones that were playing on the Army teams. And in 46, all the major leaguers, almost all the major leaguers who were really good were already back in baseball. 46, the Cardinals won the National League pennant. They with Stan Musial and a whole bunch of people who had been in the Army. So no, he had never faced major league pitching until that spring training. But there's always you always see a rookie pitcher, several rookie pitchers who come in, have 2 or 3 good games until the batters figure them out, and then they don't win anymore. And I think that's what happened to Clint.
Well, you certainly can't compare him to Ohtani because Ohtani had immediate success.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Ohtani is a phenomenon. There's never really been a player like him except maybe Babe Ruth in 1919 and part of 1920. So
And Babe Ruth only pitched a couple of seasons, really.
oh, well, as a pitcher, when he was only a pitcher, he pitched a few good seasons. But in 1919 is when they realized, wait a minute, this guy's killing the ball. But what I'm saying is you can't get mad at Clint Hartung because he's not as good as Shohei Ohtani. That's kind of a high bar.
That I think it's a scouting problem. Whatever it was, there's so many that don't work out in the major leagues. That's the bottom line. But thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Howard, you were up, then Larry, then Steve.
Hey, Peter, very good presentation. I will admit I didn't know much about the Hartung, but I noticed when you were doing all the facts about his life, he had some things in common with my father, who, by the way, was a big-time New York Giant fan in the Boulder Grounds. Hartung was born 5 days before my father was.
Wow.
And they both were enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1943. Mm-hmm. My father ended up going to Okinawa, and as soon as he was discharged, he was back to the Polo Grounds to see the Giants play right through 57. You mentioned Walker Cooper. I was fortunate enough to meet him at a memorabilia show, I think in the early 90s. In fact, I have his autograph. And I remember asking him about some of the best pitchers he caught for. And I remember he mentioned Hartung. It sticks in my mind, and it was something that's been lying in the back of my mind, I guess, since the 1990s when I met him at I think it was in New Jersey, the Meadowlands or something, not Giants, somewhere in the Byrne Arena, maybe it was called then, one of those arenas where the New Jersey sports teams played. So I met Walker Cooper, and there were a lot of 1940s New York Giants in there, and they were all real nice guys. I mean, really, I know the teams were basically lousy in the 40s. My father loved Mel Ott, even though he used to tell me, he would do the batting stance, show me how he stood at the plate with his leg up, but that he was just an absolutely terrible manager. So I wanted to just mention those couple of things. I want to switch gears for just a minute because I know you mentioned early when you started that you grew up as a Met fan, and so did I. Giants, Mets, both teams, and basically the Mets. You probably know today's a pretty sad day here in New York baseball land with the
Yes.
Bud Harrelson's passing. And the media has been showing a lot of pictures. And this is a Giants group, so I'll tell you one thing I saw that related to the Giants. It was the 73 World Series, Mets against Oakland, game 3 in Oakland. And there's a picture of Harrelson crossing the plate, and the catcher, I think it was Fossey, I don't remember, tagged him, and Harrelson denied that he tagged him. But on the ground, squatting down, was Willie Mays on those bad knees, squatting down, and then that was the picture itself. And then if you saw the follow-up picture, he's on both knees, pleading with Augie Donatelli, saying, "Hey, I got the best view," and Harrelson was safe. So, but they didn't change the call. They didn't have instant replay in those days. Nothing. And the Mets fortunately did win that game. But it was a sad day losing Buddy today. I was at the Buckner game, and I remember him running right behind Ray Knight after Buckner made the error. And Harrelson even said today, and I was kind of surprised to hear this, that he had to run slower. He had to make sure that that Knight touched the plate first. But I was surprised because Harrelson wasn't an active player. He was just a coach. But I guess the rules apply. The guy has to touch home plate first before the run counts, and nobody else, not even a coach or the trainer or anybody. So sad day today in New York baseball, but we lost Seaver a couple of years ago. So the 51 Giants just lost somebody, Gardner, recently, and I just read that the 62 Mets a few weeks ago, I believe, lost Ken McKenzie.
Yeah, Ken McKenzie, the
I
only
didn't know
winning
that
pitcher for the 62 Mets.
Yeah, I didn't know that he had died until his name came up today. So, but New York baseball, the Giants have just 7. I think Gary said about 7 left now, and including Willie, and the 69 Mets. There's still plenty left, but one by one they're dying. Anyway, thanks. It was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Howard, thank you. And if I could just add one thing to that, I was at the 73 playoff game
So
where
was my
Pete
brother.
Rose slid hard into Buddy Harrelson and knocked him over. And Harrelson, if you guys didn't know, was like 140 pounds and short. But Pete Rose slid in hard, and the next thing you know, Buddy is punching him, and they're rolling around on the ground and everything. That's ended up winning that game, but I've always remembered that, and I was sad to see him go too.
Well, Peter, as I've told the group here several times, my brother was a sports writer then for a paper in New Jersey, and he was at that game covering it. And he brought my parents along as their guests. They were sitting in the stand, so they were there too. I was up at college, so I had to catch the instant replays later on. They weren't so instant anymore, the evening news. But yeah, sad day today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Howard. Larry, you were up?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. Thanks for the reminiscence, and it is indeed a sad day. I wasn't aware until you just mentioned it. Peter, thanks. Great presentation. I have only one question, and it's kind of a minor one. In one of your slides, you had Clint in a Minneapolis Millers uniform, and it looked like he was pitching. It looked like he was in a pitching motion. Did he pitch for the Millers or for any of his minor league teams?
He did not pitch for any of his. Well, I didn't find a record that he pitched for them. So I don't think so. But he did pitch for the Minneapolis. Oh, excuse me. Not the second time. The first time he pitched for the first time he was on the Minneapolis Millers, he did pitch for him. So before World War II, he pitched for him.
Thank you.
Which, I assume is when the picture's from, but actually I wasn't able to find a source for it.
Thank you, Larry. Steve, you were up.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. And Gary said, I love it when you get somebody on who talks about someone that's really a relatively unknown, other than he was a pinch runner. You brought up a lot of stuff that I had no clue about any of these things. And he was obviously a family man, like you said, and all good stuff. Just a couple of side notes here. Mel Ott, they used to call the home runs Chinese home runs. Mel Ott changed that. He called it a chop suey home run. Don't really know why, but
I've never heard that. That's great.
You talked about, players having jobs after the season. Not just someone like Clint Hartung, even someone like Joe Black, who was a big-time player. He became a school administrator in junior high school, and then he had an executive job with Greyhound. So there was more to life than baseball for most of these guys, even the big-time players. That picture with that picture with Newcomb at second base, obviously waiting to see that Thompson signed, touched all the bags. I have the article from September 28th, a few days before, where Dressen was quoted as saying, "We're going to win it." He basically was one of the reasons they lost it. He overused his pitchers, and he had another pitcher in the bullpen that supposedly bounced the curveball. And I'm only bringing that up because Gary was able to get Carl Erskine to speak to our group a while back, and I want to let the group know. And it's sad, but it seems to be getting better. Betty Erskine took a fall and broke a hip. She had surgery, but supposedly she's on the mend. So you might keep the Erskine family in your prayers, all of us. Thanks again for a great presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. And actually, you reminded me that I forgot to tell you all something. That Bobby Thompson signature on that photo is actually Bobby Thompson. A few years ago, well, more than a few years ago,
Yeah,
I was in Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame, and he was signing pictures.
What
So
year
I
was
had,
What year were you there?
when was I there and got that picture? It
All right.
was 19, you know what? I would have to look it up. 19, oh, I tell you, the summer of 86.
Oh, that's a long time ago. Okay.
And the reason I was in Cooperstown was actually I was directing summer stock at the Cooperstown Summer Theater. I was directing a production of Neil Simon's The Star-Spangled Girl. But of course, for me, on off days, I would go into town and there was Bobby Thompson signing. So I paid whatever it was for the picture and I got him to sign. So it's an authentic Bobby Thompson signature.
Okay. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Peter, we got about 3 more questions. You good for time?
Oh yeah, I'm good.
I have
I'm
a
happy to
question.
answer whatever you want.
Okay, we
I have
got
a
we got
question.
4. We got Jim, Harvey, Charles, and Frank. Jim, you are
Okay.
up, Judge.
Right. Thanks, Gary. Peter, you piqued my interest when you were talking about the bidding war in 46. And I was just wondering, why didn't we retain his rights when he came back from the war? Because he had been under contract. And I don't think when the other players were coming back from the war, I don't remember everybody going up for bid. They weren't free agents. I thought the rights were retained by the club who had previously signed them before they went in. What was unique
That's
about
normally the way I expected it to be done. And the best answer I could get, which I did not put in the article because I could not really verify it, was that it was Hartung. He said if he wasn't paid more, what was commensurate with whatever it was he was doing, he wasn't going to come back. And also, the bidding war was with the Giants and a couple of other teams, and I'm not really sure why the Giants didn't just say, okay, well, we'll pay you more and work that out. It was very difficult to find, because if I owned a player and I paid him 500, I don't know why I'd pay him 35,000. But I really think it came to a bidding war. Just, he said, I don't care. And that was also one of the reasons. See, this was speculation again, why I didn't put it in my article. The speculation was that Hartung re-enlisted to prove that he meant it.
Okay.
If you don't pay me, if you don't pay me or let me go, I'm just not coming back to you.
I can see how he'd have leverage with the Giants with that, but I don't know why he can all of a sudden start accepting offers from other teams.
Yeah, and again, as far as bidding war goes, I'm going on that on secondary sources, original newspaper articles, but they weren't that explicit. We didn't have the same, while baseball was covered, we have a lot more good coverage of what's going on with bids and with offers today than they did back then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Weinberg.
Peter, I really enjoyed that presentation. It was well done. Just one small thing you cued in my head. About 15 or so years ago, I had a wonderful primary care physician who was, like me, a New York Giants fan, and we carried it across country, even though we're still here in New York. And I was worried I was losing my memory. So he said to me, "Yeah, you're not losing your memory." And then he gave me a test. He said, "Who was on third base when Bobby hit the home run?" I said, "Clint Hartung." He said, "You're fine." Thank you very much.
If I can say just one more thing, Gary,
You can say
because hearing all you guys, I'm remembering my dad telling me because he was not at the game 3 in 1951, but he was working in Manhattan. And he said, when Thompson hit the home run, even though he was working in an office building, all of a sudden there was a roar up and down the streets, people screaming and yelling. He said he'd never heard a roar like that in his entire life, as when, because people were listening on the radio, the famous call, the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant. And I just thought, I never thought I would hear a roar like that. But I was remembering I did. In 1986, I was living in Brooklyn, and the ball goes through Buckner's legs, as Howard mentioned, in game 6. And that I heard that roar that my dad talked to me about. I even remember thinking, this is the roar that Dad said we got from 1951. I was in an apartment building, screaming up and down the street, pounding on my walls. People were pounding. I mean, I was excited myself, but I wasn't banging on the wall or anything. But people were pounding on walls. They were pouring out of the bars on the corners. And I realized that if those of you who were there heard that must have been the same kind of reaction my dad heard after Thompson hit the home run and scored.
Peter, I was at the game, as I mentioned, and yeah, the crowd just lost it. I mean, I can't even describe it. And I was taping it at home too, so I got back and I watched the VCR of it, the tape of it. But being there was just the most incredible baseball moment of my life. That ball going through his legs.
Gary, can I interject? My uncle, who was 91, who passed about 18 months ago, was a Giants fan living in Brooklyn when Bobby hit the home run. And I always wanted my uncle to join us at these meetings. He didn't want to, but he would regale me with stories about what he heard on his Brooklyn block in Brownsville in 1951 when Bobby hit the home run, and one of his dear friends was running down the street cursing Bobby Thompson, the Giants. So that was the other side of that home run. There's always two sides to a home run like that. I happened to be in Shea Stadium for game 6 when, is it game 6? Yeah, when Mookie Wilson hit the ball through the legs.
Right, through Buckner's legs, yes.
I was seated. We had extra seats. My firm had 4 seats. The Mets gave us the opportunity to buy 4 more, but they put us up in right field. And which I was there with a dear friend and my brother and my nephew who were Mets fans. I could see the parking lot, and I could see all the Mets fans, the loyal Mets fans, leaving the game while the Mets were putting on this great comeback. I didn't leave, even though I'm a Giants fan. And it was like New Year's Eve, trying to get out. I didn't get out of there for about an hour. I had my car wedged in the parking lot. But I remember seeing the Mets lead up to Mookie's ground ball through Buckner's legs. And my nephew, I'm trying to remember how old he was. He was a virtual baby, a kid. And he says to me, after the Mets get a couple of hits, he says, Uncle Harvey, do you really think the Mets can win? And I said, sure, Troy, sure they could. So my friend, happens to be a Yankees fan, Jimmy Brown, he looks at me, he says, do you really think the Mets could win this? I said, oh, no, I don't know. I don't know. It's baseball. It's never over till it's over, somebody once said.
Thank you, Harvey.
Well, do you know the story that the scoreboard said, congratulations, Red Sox?
I was close to the scoreboard. I saw that scoreboard flash. Congratulations, Red Sox.
Yep. With an out to go. That never came.
Yep.
Charles, you are up.
Okay, Peter, first thing, 1, excellent presentation. Absolutely loved it. 2 is, I'm sorry I didn't get to see your summer stock thing I was in Cooperstown in August of 86. I went for induction weekend to see McCovey get inducted.
Wow. I was there, actually. That was an off day when they had the induction in the Hall of Fame game. So I couldn't get close to the induction, but I did go see the Hall of Fame game.
We were like right at the fence thing because they had a fenced off area for family and friends and whatever. And we were like right there. And I went with my brother-in-law. We'd taken the bus up like the night before, and or the morning before, I think it was. We'd gone to a Mets game, Mets Expos. It was like we had 3 rain delays. Got back to the apartment at 2 a.m. Had to be up at 4 a.m. to go catch the bus upstate, and ended up camping out on the porch of the Cooperstown Library across the street from the Hall of Fame.
Mm.
So
Yeah, it was,
that to me was a great weekend.
it was, I enjoyed my time in Cooperstown, very much, actually. It was,
That's actually the only time I've been. I'm hoping for, I'm not sure who's going to get inducted first. If it's going to be, Buster Posey or Bruce Bochy, but I'm hoping to go for either one of those guys.
I think it'll be Buster first, because
Hey,
Bruce now is managing again, right?
First time ballot, Steve, remember, you're not allowed to go.
So, but thank you again for the excellent presentation.
You're welcome.
Frank, take us home.
Well, I want to thank Peter for the great presentation. The question I asked was preempted. I was going to ask him about Clint Hartung, but he answered the question before I asked it. Thank you.
Frank, I'm the one who I asked Peter on your behalf, because you mentioned that you mentioned that a couple of months ago. So when I booked Peter, that was one of the questions I asked him.
Maybe he can still get the answer. Okay, thank you.
If I get the answer, I'll tell you. It's just one of those things where it's just such an off the wall question to ask and the publicist may not know, and it's the football season, but I'll keep after it because now I want to know too. I did find out she was born in Louisiana, and that's not that far from Texas. So she might actually she might be a relative. It's certainly possible.
Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, the second one I ever heard of. I emailed him, asked him if he was related to the only one, a 50s Major League pitcher, Ken Raffensperger. And he said he's been asked that question many times and can't find out. Thank you very much. Great program.
You're welcome.
Peter, we really can't thank you. That was fabulous, informative, entertaining, and let's all give it up for Peter Gordon.
Oh, well, thank you all very much. I have to say, I loved putting it together because it's great to talk to people who really care about this stuff.
And like I looked up Fred Merkel. It was September 23rd, so maybe we could do something in and around that date. Talk about Merkel's boner.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of sources on that. I actually own a copy of Pitching in a Pinch, Christy Mathewson's ghost written book, but it's actually pretty well written, and it's got just a great description of the game.
Well, we'll see. Hopefully, listen, even before then, don't be a stranger to our group. I know you joined us last week, but if somebody comes on who you would like to hear the discussion, please hop aboard. Let's again give it up for Peter Gordon.
All right.
Guys,
thank you, folks.
I'm going to stop the recording here, and if anybody wants to hang around and talk about Giant baseball, we can do that. But we'll see each other next Thursday with Alex Pavlovich. I know Charles will definitely be here for that one to talk about what's going on with the Giants. So have a great night, everybody, and be well. Take good care.
Okay. Yeah, you too. I'm gonna head out, but great to see you, and I look forward to seeing you all again.
Peter, be well.
Right. Bye-bye.